Hello everyone, and welcome to Kareniya's Room. As you know, recently I made a video where I detailed 10 anime shows and films that I had given a 10 on MyAnimeList, as such marking them as the shows and films that I've enjoyed the most. However, with every great film or TV show, there also sits those properties that sit in the opposite end of the spectrum. Of course, I'm talking about pieces of media, of anime media, that I either find to be disappointing for some reason or another, or just generally awful. In today's video, I will give you a list of 7 shows, films, OVAs, etc. that I, for some reason or another, did not find interesting or just outright disliked. A couple caveats I will be adding to this video, however. First, I will be excluding 2 particular anime projects from this list, namely Mars of Destruction and Tenkudanzai Skelter Heaven. The reason I'm excluding these 2 shows is that I feel it would be too obvious as to which shows or whatever that I find to be the worst, being rated a 1 and 2 on my MyAnimeList page respectively, as well as just generally being talked about to high heaven. I would, however, recommend watching those if you're into watching bad movies for fun, like people do with Tommy Wiseau's The Room.
Oh, hi, Mark.
At least for Skelter Heaven, anyway. Mars of Destruction is just generally awful. Secondly, I will stress that this is in no particular order and is just a list, same as my last video, my 10 favorite shows. I would have a difficult time deciding which ones I found worse than others, and I also don't really care to go into that much effort over stuff I don't like all that much. Although I will say, I could say that there are certain shows on here that I definitely do not think are as bad. This is just for ranking's sake. And before we begin, I will also stress that if you like anything on this list, I guarantee some of you will anyway, that's perfectly fine by me. I would never cripple your enjoyment of a show or OVA or so on, even if I find it to not be enjoyable or trash. So try not to take this as an attack on you, because it most certainly is not. With all that being said, let's get on with the video. Oh, hi. Editing Kareniya here. This script was recorded just before the end of My Life as Inukai-san's dog, so that's not on here, but that also recently got a 3 for me. It is generic, ecchi garbage with maybe bestiality themes, so don't watch this. Anyway, on with the video, for real this time. 1. Kyokai no Kanata, aka Beyond the Boundary. This is a 2013 anime series by one of my favorite anime studios, Kyoto Animation. I had no idea what to really expect going into this show, since this particular studio animates properties of various styles and quality, with more lighthearted stuff like K-On! And Amagi Brilliant Park, to more supernatural kinda, but still in the same vein as Haruhi Suzumiya, and more shows dedicated to drama and more heavy themes like Violet Evergarden. This 12-episode anime initially caught my eye as I had seen Mirai, the main girl that you see here in the poster specifically, in a lot of anime clip compilations, and learning this was a KyoAni show, I naturally decided to give the show a shot, since I had not been disappointed by their work previously. Again, I've loved stuff like K-On!, like Haruhi, like Hibike Euphonium, and etc., even Dragon Maid and all these other shows. However, this show really did not do it for me. As is usual with KyoAni, the visuals of the fight scenes are very well pleasing to the eye, and the idea of the show itself seems fine. You can't really go too wrong with fighting supernatural beings and all kinds of crazy powers, whatever. That being said, that's all I really felt that stood out from this show, besides the character designs of Mirai and Mitsuki Inase, the 2 female leads in our quartet. Other than basic personality traits, such as Kanbaru, our main boy, being down bad for girls with glasses, can relate, or Hirumi having a rather big, sister complex, is the right word, I believe. Yeah. The rest of the characterization never really stood out in my mind. And if you can't draw me in with a cast of characters who anchor the show, all that's left is a story that I felt was pretty lackluster by the second half of the show, and it became an endurance test to simply finish it, of which the payoff was nothing all that special. I am aware there's a sequel movie to this, and I am also aware that this show is probably going to be one of the more controversial takes on this list, but I don't feel personally like the movie's going to change all that much for me. I gave Beyond the Boundary a 5. It was not a bad show by any means, but nothing about it really stands out from the rest. And in my opinion, this is easily KyoAni's weakest production that I personally have seen so far. I would still recommend giving it a couple episodes, since I may be an outlier in my opinion here, but I would not say that this show I will watch again. Anyway, let's move on with the list. 2. Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Well, I said Beyond the Boundary would be one of my more controversial takes, but this might be the other one on the list, and maybe the most controversial. This is the most recent show on this list, being released in September 2022 as a collaboration between Netflix and CD Projekt Red, the Polish game studio behind the Cyberpunk franchise that this anime is based around, and is also animated by Studio Trigger of Little Witch Academia and Kill La Kill fame. Having never played any of the Cyberpunk games myself, I didn't really have any expectations going into this, and I was purely going in based on how well received this was by friends in the anime community mostly. I will always praise Studio Trigger's art style for how dynamic it makes everything seem, and is a lot more expressive than a lot of other anime out there today, though you probably know I feel this way from my previous video. However, there's not a lot going on with this series, at least as a standalone project, and since I haven't played the games, I don't exactly have any attachment to this franchise anyway. I felt the character designs were great, and I found the English dub of the show was actually pretty enjoyable, with great voice talent like Zach Aguilar as the main lead, Emmy Lowe as Lucy, and surprisingly the role of one of the later characters in the show, Faraday, being voiced by Mr. Gus Fring himself, Mr. Giancarlo Esposito, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name. However, the gritty violence, great voice work, and art style are window dressing for characters who I personally feel are very empty, and the story that really falls off by the end of the first half of the anime. As a spectacle, the show was fun to watch, but as a show, I just felt empty and didn't really grow attached to any of the characters specifically. Rebecca is a fun character, but even this gun-toting, fierce-talking lolly didn't stick with me once the show was over, and spoilers here, her death felt pretty anticlimactic to me. Then again, I wouldn't expect her to beat the big bad Atom Smasher, even if David could not with all his cyber gear. It is what it is. Judging by the overwhelming positive reaction to this show, I'm probably going to be one of the outliers in saying that I wasn't too big on this show. Overall, if you like Cyberpunk, you might like this show. As for me, I guess it's just not my thing. I gave this a 6 overall, but it's not something I'll likely revisit. Anyway, let's move on with the list. 3. Monster Musume, also known as Everyday Life with Monster Girls. Here's a show that I think won't be as contentious to hate, but honestly, who knows, and I don't really care. This is a 2015 anime produced by Studio Lurch, or Lurche, the same studio behind one of my favorite animes, Asobi Asobase, as well as stuff like Assassination Classroom, Toilet Bound Hanako-kun, and Classroom of the Elite. This show, however, doesn't even hold a candle to any of those as far as I'm concerned. Now, this is not a show I would normally watch. Most ecchi anime I've seen are either titillating but inoffensive, like My Dress Up Darling or Food Wars, or stuff like this. And by that, I mean it's all you really come for. Especially if you get the uncut version, which gives you nipples if that's what you really want. But to be honest with you, I really do not understand the love for monster girls, especially in this show. While we do have some great voice talent like Sora Amamiya, who also voices Aqua from Konosuba and Chizuru from Rent-a-Girlfriend, or Junji Majima, who also voices Ryuji Takasu from Toradora, who play our original lead characters Mia and the main boy I forget the name of, the characters themselves are not interesting, and most characterization can be ignored when the time calls for one of them to have their breasts spill out, or when trying to seduce our main boy in any manner of ways. While the designs of the girls are at the very least something you'll remember, or if you are a fan of the show, something that may even titillate you, I can't say that it's anything I would say is any better than the designs in a similarly ecchi show like Interspecies Reviewers. However, that show at least has a fun cast with some personality behind the gratuitous ecchi softcore hentai interspliced between each episode. I guess, in other words, if you want an ecchi show with monster girls, you'd be better off watching interspecies reviewers rather than this trite. I gave Monster Musume a 4, but honestly I might even change my rating to something lower. Just a total waste of my time, really. Let's move on. 4. The hidden dungeon only I can enter. Hey look, an ecchi harem series. Wait a minute. Didn't we kind of just have one of those? Anyway, this is a 2021 series created by Okuruto Noboru according to Mal. I don't know if that's a company or a person, but it doesn't really matter. Who is the same creator behind Season 2 of How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, which is the only thing on that list I'm familiar with. I knew the show was going to be trash going into it, seeing as most of the pictures or GIFs or YouTube videos that came out of this show were either close-ups of breasts, panty shots, or a particular teacher who heals our protagonist Kun, in a sense, with her booty. And I'm not making that one up. Most of the characters outside our main cast are completely forgettable, apart from the teacher named Elna, who I just mentioned, and the little sister of our main boy, who's named Alice, and she is the inverse of the Neisayer from Beyond the Boundaries earlier, and she has a brother complex, and it is very weird. Let's just say that. Our characters aren't all that interesting, and mostly are there if we need an ecchi shot or someone to fawn over the protagonist in a given scene, though they are still competent when it comes to combat at the very least. The art is nothing to really praise, but I mean, I don't hate it. It's just kind of As usual though, the voice cast is one saving grace for the show. We have a ton of great talent from Miyu Tomita, aka Miko Ino from Kaguya, Ryota Osaka, Sora Amamiya, Akari Kito, Yui Horii, the list goes on. Bunch of names. It's pretty crazy that such a cast can be put on a show like this. I gave this show a 3. It's not really worth watching. If you want to see anything from the show, just check out clips on YouTube and you'll kind of get what it's all about. But even then, would I recommend it?
No.
Moving on. 5. Osamake, also known as the rom-com where the childhood friend won't lose. Oh, another harem show. I think there's a trend here. And again, the trend of a great voice cast on such a snoozer of a show. Produced in 2021 by Doga Kobo, one of my other favorite studios out there. This is a harem series that, as the title suggests, the childhood friend shall not lose. The twist, however, is that our protag-kun, one Sueharu Maru, is being pursued by 2 girls who both turn out to be childhood friends of his. And it is an interesting love triangle, and by interesting, I mean interesting in the fact that that's not a description. Honestly, I don't really have a lot to say of this show. I watched it back when it was airing because I usually do watch the new Doga Kobo shows, since they've made a lot of stuff I've really enjoyed, as I've mentioned before in previous videos like Gabriel Dropout, Umaru-chan, New Game, and more recently with My Senpai is Annoying. Great series, by the way. However, where Doga Kobo usually succeed in making enjoyable slice-of-life comedy, this one was not it. I had no attachment to really any character in this show. I found both of the main girls unlikable in certain ways, and I guess I don't really feel any of the attempts of melodrama really did anything, and it just kind of felt flat. I gave it a 5 mostly for just being mediocre but not completely off-putting. If you want an actual good school harem romance, or love triangle or whatever you'd consider this, literally just go watch Origairu. Next. 6. Shimoneta, also known as a boring world where the concept of dirty jokes doesn't exist. Back to the ecchi camp we go with this one. This 2015 anime from JC Staff was one I heard people talk about a lot for being kinda crazy, and I mean, they are right about that. The series is set in an alternative Japan where a strict moral code is harshly enforced by the government. Every citizen wears what's essentially a choker that tracks their movements and keeps tabs on them in order to keep society from being corrupted by sexual deviancy. This is protested by Socks, a cohort of mild to, well, crazy, degenerate students at Tokioka Academy. They seek to challenge these prudent laws by any means that they can, no matter how crazy. On its face, this is just a simple gag series that seeks to be as raunchy as they could get away with on TV, and in manga form as well. Visual gags, such as one of our cast's heads, looking suspiciously like a certain part of the male anatomy, and just the overall visuals of seeing one of the biggest buff men in the show in women's lingerie is interesting to say the least. Overall, I'm willing to be more kind to the show, despite a lot of its humor simply being about being perverted and raunchy and having a good voice cast behind it. However, the jokes do run old pretty quick, and the character in specifics, Anna Nishinomiya, I don't know, being a bit disgusting. And I do mean disgusting. If you've ever heard the term love nectar in anime circles, this is probably where it comes from. While the art style is nothing to write home about, I do find it charming in its own way, and I think that it works just fine in this series. I will also say, though, that the ending song to the show is kind of annoying, and I really don't like it. I've wanted to skip it every time, but for some reason I didn't, and maybe I'm just a masochist. Overall, I gave Shimoneta a 6. It was not awful, and actually somewhat enjoyable at times, but again, the humor does fall after like 3 episodes, and I really hated Anna, and that's no disrespect to the VA, may she rest in peace, but oh my god, you sold her. So good at being so bad. Anyway, let's get our final entry in this list. Finally, number 7, Pride of Orange. Our last entry on this list, and this is going to be a pretty short and sweet entry, but that's mostly because I dropped the series 3 episodes in. This is a 2021 series from Studio C2C, the same studio behind World End, The Journey of Elena, a really good show, and Hitori Bochi, not to be confused with Bochi from Bochi the Rock. It's this Bochi on the screen. It's a sports anime centered around a group of girls getting together to play ice hockey, or learning how to play competently anyway. I don't remember much of the plot, or really anything about the characters since I dropped it over a year ago and never looked back. I was quite interested in the concept of the show at first. I mean, after all, I'm Canadian, and hockey is one of our biggest pastimes. And I was happy to see hockey getting some love after all the basketball and baseball anime we've gotten over the past few years. However, I was not happy about this one. I dropped this, as I said before, after 3 episodes, and we were only getting into the girls starting their journey into the world of hockey, but I was just so bored the whole time I was watching it. The characters are forgettable and uninteresting, character designs are kind of generic and I don't really care for them, and the whole anime was essentially an ad for a mobile game of the same name, which I don't necessarily hate, since Azure Lane, Princess Connect, Arc Knights, and even Genshin Impact are getting anime, or already have anime adaptations to sell their game. But if this is your promotion for your game, wasn't very good, mate. By the looks of things, the game only lasted about 8 months, which, no disrespect to the devs, but yeah, that's not great, and this is not a great piece of advertisement for your game. As I said before, I didn't rate it because I dropped it, so you'll know how I feel about it, but this is probably one of the ones I just really did not like. Well, that's the list. Well, I didn't have a list of 10 since I hadn't really watched too many shows that I give a pretty low score, and also kind of handicapped myself by excluding Skelter Heaven and Mars of Destruction. I still thought I'd talk about some of these shows just to understand some things that I don't really vibe with. Those things mostly seem to be harem, ecchi or not, shows with characters who are not really interesting people to listen to or look at, or shows that just seek to be just for titillating the audience or selling them a product. Don't get me wrong, I don't think ecchi can ruin any anime it touches, or that making an anime based on a game or other franchise is bad. Stuff like My Dress Up Darling are kinda ecchi at times, and I'm sure stuff like Princess Connect are a pretty solid series that might interest me. Just don't make it a cheap ad or do something besides bounce boobs on the screen. At the end of the day, we'll all have our tastes and stuff that we find to be good or bad. While I may dislike Cyberpunk Edgerunners or Monster Musume, it doesn't mean you have to as well. At the same time, don't flame me for not liking something that you do. That's kid shit, and we're better than that. With all that being said, I'd like to thank you for watching this video. We are now in 2023, and we have a whole new world of anime to explore over these next 12 months. I will keep you guys updated on stuff I will be watching, and maybe make some content about specific shows too. I just have to get working on that when I can. God help me. Anyway, that's it for me. My name is Kareniya, and don't forget, you are always welcome in Kareniya's room. Ciao!